How TO learn 10x faster is not about being born intelligent, having a high IQ, or studying all day like a machine. It is about understanding how your brain actually works and then using that system instead of fighting against it. Because most people fail at learning not because they are weak, but because they're using completely outdated methods that were designed for a different era, a different brain lifestyle, and a different world. And if you're a beginner who feels slow, confused, or overwhelmed, this is not your fault. You were simply never taught how learning truly happens. So the first thing you must understand is that learning is not about time. It is about quality of attention and emotional engagement, because the human brain does not remember information equally. It remembers what feels important, what feels connected, and what feels meaningful, which is why you can remember movie scenes, emotional moments, or conversations from years ago, but forget what you studied yesterday. And this single realization changes everything. Because if you want to learn 10x faster, you must turn boring information into something your brain thinks is valuable, urgent, and alive. And the fastest learners in the world do not sit for long hours. They create intensity in short sessions, because intensity forces focus, and focus is the doorway to memory. And this is why studying for 10 distracted hours is worse than studying for one deeply focused hour. And if you're constantly checking your phone, switching tabs, or thinking about something else while learning, your brain never enters deep processing mode. And without deep processing, there's no long-term memory, only short-term confusion. So the first rule of fast learning is protecting your attention like it is gold, because attention is the fuel of intelligence. And once you understand this, the second powerful concept is active learning versus passive learning. Because most beginners make the mistake of reading, watching, or listening and calling it learning, but consuming information is not learning. Interacting with information is learning, which means if you can explain something in your own words, question it, connect it to real life, or teach it to someone else, then and only then has learning happened, because your brain strengthens connections when it is forced to retrieve information, not when it is simply exposed to it. And this is why the act of recalling what you learned without looking at notes is one of the most powerful techniques ever discovered. Because every time you struggle to remember, your brain rewires itself to remember better next time. And this struggle is not a sign of failure. It is the sign that learning is happening, which is why fast learners are not afraid of confusion. They use confusion as a signal that growth is happening. And beginners must understand that feeling confused means your brain is building new pathways, not that you are stupid. And once you accept this, your fear of learning disappears. And when fear disappears, speed increases, because fear blocks curiosity, and curiosity is the engine of fast learning. And the third major secret of learning faster is chunking information, because your brain cannot handle large amounts of random data, but it can handle patterns extremely well. So instead of memorizing hundreds of facts, fast learners group information into stories, because a story sticks better than a list, and a pattern sticks better than isolated facts. Which is why when you understand the why behind something, the how becomes easy. And this is why memorization without understanding is slow and fragile. But understanding creates memory automatically. And beginners should focus on grasping core principles instead of details, because details naturally attach themselves to strong foundations. And this leads to the next powerful idea, which is learning just in time instead of learning everything at once, because the brain remembers what it uses, not what it stores. So when you learn something and immediately apply it, even in a small way, your brain marks it as important for survival, and survival-related information is remembered deeply, which is why people who learn skills through real projects learn much faster than those who only study theory. And this applies to everything, whether it is AI, coding, business, language learning, or academics. And if you're a beginner, you must stop waiting for perfection and start applying early, because action clarifies thinking and clarity accelerates learning. And another hidden accelerator is emotional connection, because emotions act like glue for memory. So if you can attach excitement, curiosity, urgency, or even fear to what you're learning, your brain will remember it faster, which is why learning something with a clear goal, deadline, or personal reason multiplies speed instantly. And this is also why people learn faster when they're under pressure, not because pressure is good, but because it forces focus and emotional intensity. And you can create healthy pressure by setting public goals, teaching others, or committing to small challenges. And now comes one of the most ignored yet powerful factors, which is sleep, because learning does not happen when you study. Learning happens when you sleep, because sleep is when the brain consolidates memories, strengthens neural connections, and removes unnecessary information. So sacrificing sleep to study more is actually one of the worst strategies for fast learning, because a tired brain is slow, forgetful, and inefficient, and beginners who respect sleep will always outperform those who ignore it. And along with sleep, movement is critical because the brain is not separate from the body. Physical movement increases blood flow, oxygen, and neurochemicals that improve learning speed, which is why walking, light exercise, or stretching during study breaks dramatically improves retention. And this leads to another key principle, which is spaced repetition, because cramming feels productive but creates weak memory, while spacing your learning over time strengthens recall, because every time you revisit information after forgetting a little, you strengthen it more deeply. And this forgetting is not a problem. It is part of the process, and beginners should understand that forgetting is not failure. Forgetting is a feature of learning. And once you accept forgetting as normal, you stop feeling frustrated and start learning faster. And another massive accelerator is environment design, because your environment shapes your behavior more than motivation ever will. So if your study space is filled with distractions, noise, and temptations, your brain will resist learning. But if your environment is clean, quiet, and designed for focus, learning becomes easier automatically. And this is why fast learners remove friction from good habits and add friction to bad ones, like keeping the phone away, using full screen mode, or studying at the same time every day to build a learning ritual. And rituals reduce decision fatigue, which saves mental energy for learning itself. And now we come to mindset, because mindset determines speed more than talent, and the fastest learners believe that skills are built, not gifted. And this belief changes how they react to difficulty, because instead of quitting, they experiment, adjust, and continue. And beginners must understand that every expert you admire was once slow, confused, and frustrated, but they kept going long enough for clarity to arrive, and clarity always arrives for those who persist intelligently. And intelligent persistence means reflecting on what works and what doesn't, not repeating the same mistakes blindly. And this is why learning how to learn, is the highest leverage skill you can ever build. Because once you know how to learn, every new skill becomes easier, faster, and less intimidating. And finally, the most important principle of all is identity, because people learn faster when learning becomes part of who they are, not just something they do. So instead of saying, I'm trying to learn, say, I am a learner, because identity drives behavior automatically. And when learning becomes part of your identity, consistency becomes effortless, and speed becomes natural. And this is how ordinary beginners transform into fast learners, not by working harder, but by working smarter, understanding their brain, respecting the process, and staying patient during confusion, because learning is not a straight line. It is a curve, slow at first, then suddenly fast. And those who quit early never see the acceleration, but those who stay long enough experience exponential growth. And if you apply even a few of these principles consistently, you will not just learn faster, you will think differently, act confidently, and build a future that most people only dream about.